So good day, everyone. I'm Dr. Christine Slavik from the University of the Fraser Valley, and I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And we are a quartet presenting this morning, and each person will explain their relationship to the University of the Fraser Valley. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that the university is situated on Indigenous lands and conduct a territorial acknowledgement. Our Department of Child, Youth and Family Studies together respect and acknowledges Soktama, the territory of the Halkwamelem speaking Stalo peoples who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. As we enact reconciliation and journey towards wellness in this interconnected web of life, we are grateful for the generosity, stewardship, and guidance of Indigenous people. So I will stop sharing and turn the screen over to Michaela.
Good morning. My name is Michaela. I attend the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, BC. I am in my 4th year of CYC, Child and Youth Care Practice right now. And I would just like to take a few moments to discuss with you folks, just my experience at UFV in the CYC program and how it has not only supported me and harbored me as a student, but as a person within the community as well. CYC and my professors have helped me tremendously through a lot of experiences, but also through a lot of hardships that I've had. In the fall of my 2nd year, I was offered an opportunity with the Ministry of Education in Victoria, BC. And it was a massive opportunity for me, but it did cause a lot of anxiety around would I have to drop out of school? Would I have to leave my professors and my classmates behind? And so I made individual meetings with a lot of my professors, and every single one of my professors helped to harbor me and support me in ways to succeed towards my education and to help me strive towards those educational goals. So one of my professors had suggested doing a directed studies course. So not only did that keep me enrolled within my studies, it also helped me within my career path and within working at the Ministry of Education. One of my professors had also gotten involved with discussing with having little meetings with me and my supervisor, and another professor had also supported me by allowing me to do her class online. So I was able to stay enrolled in my classes and stay up to date, but I also was able to take on this opportunity that was in Victoria that required me to have to move everything within a very short amount of time. So that was a very meaningful experience to me, and having those professors in my corner within the CYC program. Sorry, I got distracted a little bit there. But yeah, having those people in my corner and having that program in my corner not only helped me to excel in my studies, but it helped me to excel in a lot of opportunities. With having this opportunity with the directed studies course, I was able to be involved in making a policy manual for youth who were formerly in care, which is somewhere where I want to go with my end goal of graduating, is working with children who are in the system or out of the system. And I would have never had that opportunity if UFV didn't allow me that opportunity as well, because they were the ones who situated me with the speech that I did, which is where I was noticed, which is where I got the opportunity to go to the Ministry of Education and involve myself in the policy manual, in a co-op internship, and all these amazing experiences. So I just wanted to touch base a little bit on that and the support that I've been given, not only as a student, but as I said, as a person, that has helped me to flourish and stay in school and help me to strive and succeed. And yeah, I would just like to open it up if anyone has any questions.
Awesome, Michaela.
So do we want to move on to just another one of our presentations, or did we want to connect with Michaela's story and chat about it ourselves?
Good question. I think that maybe just offering a little, we have a few minutes still on Michaela's time, so maybe I could ask a question. So do you think that in your experience with UFV CYC program was specific to the values of the program of child and youth care? I guess kind of my question is framed around like, do you feel that you might have got the same support had you been in maybe a completely different field where relational practice isn't as looked at?
I feel like that's a very good question because I have done a few courses at other universities and before attending UFV in the CYC program, and they were different programs and it was a very different dynamic. So I do feel that with other programs and with other studies that they don't support, how do I put this? I feel like they don't support you and like look at you with like an empathetic view of, okay, everybody has problems, everybody goes through things in life, so let's figure out what we can do to kind of like support and see you strive. And I feel like that is a skill that a lot of people lack, or just in today's society in general. And so I feel like when it comes to school, a lot of like people see it as, okay, you have to get your work done, there's no exceptions, and I've been in that experience before, and coming into CYC it was not like that at all, and I was honestly kind of scared to go into a big program and take on that journey because I didn't know what it was going to look like. But CYC has harbored me or not harbored me, has helped me and supported me, sorry, in so many ways that I don't think other programs would have been able to fulfill me and look at with that empathetic view and see, okay, people do struggle. This is a real thing that happens to a lot of people, and let's support them and make sure that we see them as a person. And I just haven't really gotten that experience in other other programs, sorry. So yeah, I definitely feel like I would not have gotten it from all this support, and wouldn't have gotten these opportunities if it wasn't for the CYC program.
Thanks for sharing, Michaela.
I'm muted. I kind of like the slip around harbored. When I think of a harbor, I think of safe harbor, and, you know, kind of coming in to anchor for a little while before sailing out again. So I kind of like that idea of harbored.
So Christy, I think your turn.
Awesome. All right, I'll head right into it. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a quote. No longer in a relational universe can we study anything separate from ourselves. Our acts of observation are the part of the process that brings forth manifestation of what we are observing. That's Margaret J. Wheatley. So hi everyone, my name is Christy and I'm a recent graduate of the Bachelor of Arts Child and Youth Care program. And I finished this piece of my educational journey very recently, as recent as this past summer. So speaking of the topic of relational pedagogy and the idea of how this process in the educational journey is within the liminal space, I thought that it would be interesting to share the flow in which I'm speaking to you today, a recent grad who started their journey of postgrad education 9 years ago, and the space in which it brought me today. So the first steps in entering my educational journey 9 years ago began at the University of Fraser Valley, and at this time I was bouncing from program to program. I started social work, I moved through general studies, and took a few child and youth care courses, but I ended up seeking out this child and youth care program at UVic with a specialty in child life. So navigating the educational journey was mostly alone, and I found myself in a similar position even at this new University of Victoria. Similar patterns, bouncing around, seeking things that I wasn't sure what that was. And education took so much navigating, time and space out of me that I moved home and stopped my educational journey. I focused on my work life and working at a fun airline. And in this experience, it seemed better. I was enjoying relationships and the socialization that came with working at an airline. But something this was something far from what I was initially seeking in a field in which I wanted connection and to help others. So additionally, during this time, another little piece that I I did on the side was become a yoga instructor. This will kind of get spoken to at the end, but the world was shifting at this point and shifting into a pandemic. And it came to a place where I lost my job at the airline. I felt the pressure of returning to school, and I was at a place where I was able to focus again back on my educational journey, the value of learning and this field. So how does this all speak to the piece of relational pedagogy and the liminal space, and from which I began my educational journey to now being a graduate? So looking back, shifting from high school into a postgraduate program, I was seeking relationships, as this is what I knew from education. High school and school up to that point was very social, and it was most of my life. It was a full-time thing. Yet university was vastly different. I began bouncing around because of the lack of connection. You come to a 3-hour lecture, pack up your stuff and go home. I thought that experience was specific to University of the Fraser Valley. So that brought me to the University of Victoria. So switching universities altogether. However, this was similarly the case there as well. And when I began to focus on my social life, I thrived, but yet the world had shut down, and I was forced to look at some other pieces of my life. So when I was able to focus on strictly education during the pandemic, during online, my 3rd-year practicum was held online, and the limited resources as for where my practicum placement was the reality. And I received a call from my professor, Mark Littlefield, who is here today, with a proposal from the Child and Youth Care Department on creating a student connection similar to a student union, but more specific to the Child and Youth Care program, to bridge that gap as a piece of a relational practice outside of the aspects of the classroom that seemed to lack across the cohorts. I took this on, and this is exactly something I related to, something I was seeking. I felt like I thrived in that. It felt meaningful to me. As much as I wanted experience in my practicum working with children and youth, this was definitely something that I was seeking, and that landed for me. Another piece in this educational journey that I felt in hindsight, or on the other side of that hallway of liminal space, is my yoga practice. I sought yoga in that space when I was seeking things to create a deeper connection within myself and a relationship with myself. And one of the first classes back to the program was a mindfulness-based practice. So that was done by Dr. Slavik, who is here today as well. And we did that practice, and we focused on the relationship that we have within ourselves as well. And this drew me to filling in the gaps that I was initially seeking. Now, here I am today, and I was able to find and navigate that space. And a lot of what my educational journey through the Child and Youth Care program at UFV did provide me was this learning. I think that I was able to meet so many like-minded people that were seeking the same things, as well as so many professors. The other piece of it being that the practicum that I did, the Child and Youth Care Community Core is what we call it, was an online presence, and it helps foster those gaps that I initially felt like was missing, but it also became more relevant as the times that we were in, with it being the pandemic. So it was an online piece of where we could, create those connections outside the classroom, especially during such an isolating time. And that looked like through connections as far as like tutoring, online support, help navigating 1st and 2nd year new students into the program, and it being very new to them, but then also learning online. It became a social media platform where we're able to share some relevant information about the field, and create connections from people in all sides of the cohort, or all pieces of the cohort, whether you're in the 1st year, 4th year, or maybe a graduate. And so that was very meaningful in my experience. And I feel like all of these pieces then lined up as I come to you now. And I'm on the other side of that hallway in my learning process. I think it's something that comes up for me, and I wanted to have a little bit more of a conversation around is, so in the idea of relational learning and how it can look in many forms, what is something that you're currently doing to foster this type of learning? Or what is something you imagine at any age fosters relational learning? I'm going to open that up to you guys here.
Thank you for that, Christy. I really enjoyed being a part of that journey, and you created a pathway for me to sort of experience it with you. And your question that you ask about what is something that we do intentionally. My colleague Christine Slavik had sort of asked us to think about that as we were doing these as we were getting ready for the presentation. And I think that intentionality comes from wanting to really know who somebody is, which I think really parallels what we do in the discipline, in the field with young people and their families, is really waiting and being patient to some degree for that person to enter the boundary zone between myself and them, so that we can explore what that learning is together, and that we both benefit from it. So I think that that's one thing that I attempt to do, is try to remember about being intentional about creating meeting spaces and meeting spaces of learning.
Yeah, I like that. I think that that translates to the field that we're in, but it shows up in the classroom. One of my memories of one of my professor's classes, Kirsten Hargraves, she taught one of my research methods class. So a very dry, difficult class that, takes a lot of learning and experience, but she brought food every single time. And I think that brings I have a little visual here, but the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and being able to provide that in a classroom, and the benefits of that. So just even being the base there of, creating that basic need of food, and building off of that. So we come into the love and belonging in our relationships in the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So kind of what you spoke to, Mark, is we're really interested in the other person, and that we're patient with the other person, recognizing that the other person has a much different life space and worldview. And so how do we sit there and allow that to come about? So I think that was one of my favorite memories, thinking about that. I think going beyond a little bit of what I was asking as well is, we're starting to see this more and more in our field and in the world in general, and just even as young as like a kindergarten classroom or a daycare classroom, and just seeing how they've incorporated some of these values as far as creating relationships with things like nature, and providing a space that's accessible and open to be able to have that relational learning, and also that. Yeah.
I'm happy to answer a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, I think that what comes to mind when I think about relational pedagogy is being relationally responsible. And how can I do that is to ground myself first and be really present in the room with others, attending to them, no matter what is coming for me or them on any particular moment, like trying to be in the moment. I see that as being relationally responsible, letting whatever has come before be done, not planning for the next moment, but just really trying to be here and attune and offer my presence. And it's funny, I've taught for many years, but I still get this sense of nervousness and do I have everything prepared? And then I remind myself, just be there. And all the things you prepared might not be what's called for that day. So can you be with that reality, right? To just be open and present. So that's how I see that call to being in relational pedagogy. It starts from within. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Christine. I think that's a really beautiful answer. I think it's difficult with how society is set up nowadays. It's one thing after the other. And I think even Michaela spoke to that a little bit of just being like, we work towards one thing. And I think that kind of also pulls into an Indigenous perspective as we look at, more of Western's meaning to life is, we work to make money and we're very structured in that way versus, incorporating some of that Indigenous perspective and being with nature, being with the moment and allowing that to be creative. And I think is really important, but it also is a lot of what CYC provides in our learning. Awesome.
That's a good question.
So
I will pass it to you, Mark, unless you have. Okay.
I'll catch it.
Okay.
Thank you, Christy. I'm Mark Littlefield, and I'm a graduate of the program in which I now teach. And Christine was a big part of my journey into child and youth care, and continues to be a part of that, and probably never actually left in many, many ways. I'm going to also start with a quote by Parker Palmer. Relational trust is built on moments of human heart, such as empathy, commitment, compassion, patience, and the capacity to forgive. And so far, as we've listened to Michaela and Christy, I am seeing that from their experiences that they've touched on those things as part of the journey that they went along with us in the degree. When I came into child and youth care, it was a time in British Columbia when there had been a real big shake up in the way that human services was provided. As a result, there were many hurt practitioners, fearful and scared. And as a result of that, they were really trying to manage their own experience of what that was like. And the sad thing about it is that hurt people do hurt things. And so what I was observing is that the caring that we were supposed to do for kids and families was leaving because the person was unable to be able to care for them. And so it led me with a lot of frustration and anger. And I decided that I didn't want to be a part of anything where people were not responsible and intentional about caring for others. So I figured that counseling was what I needed to do, because counseling was, I had an idea of professionalism in the world. And so I started going back to school, and I started in adult education. I actually really enjoyed the ideas of adult education. And then I happened to open myself up by taking a class with Dr. Christine Slavik. I didn't have the doctor at the front end of that when I was with her in the class. And I entered into that classroom space very spiky, kind of like a porcupine. And my anger and frustration with the discipline presented itself in that space with really, I think what was offered by Christine was invitations to look at connection, relationship, and moving through professional practice. And what I kept on coming back to was my hurt and my sense of, but that's not what's happening. And I would keep identifying and throwing spikes into the room. And Christine was very gracious and allowed time for me to present that in that room. And then one day, and I'm not sure exactly what happened. Maybe maybe it was that I'd done enough. Maybe Christine was like, this is what I'm going to do. And she had a real big plan around it. Or maybe she was like, this is enough. And she confronted me around the way that I was thinking from a strength-based approach. So she invited me to recognize what I was doing, She invited me to recognize the strength of that ability to critically analyze. And then she invited me into a place of choice, which was I can either use that skill to continue to reflect on what the problems are and make them change, or be invited into the space and then use that skill set in order to create a difference, which is very uncomfortable to be responsible that way, to be put into a place where you're like, yes, this is really great. What are you going to do with that? And I think that for the rest of the class and that particular course, it really did bring me into a space of personal reflection. So through that one experience, I think I really realized what it was that I wanted to do, which was to be a practitioner that recognized where opportunities lie, but to be able to relationally build a partnership with folks around invitations for change. And I think that that became the basis of where my work went. And then I continued. So I went out after I graduated, I transferred over into the program, left adult ed, even though I was sad about that, because adult ed has some really beautiful ways to look at learning as well. And completed the degree. And as I was leaving, I was like, I'm back. I'm going to come back. And my goal is to go out and experience as many milieus, as many of the places that child and youth care happens, and bring that back into the classroom as offerings to the students. And I wanted to be a part of that community of learning. And that's what I did. I went out there and I invited that experiences, and I stayed in contact and often would come back to Christine to help me problem solve practice situations. And then I went and did a master's in child and youth care at the University of Victoria, where I didn't feel the same experience that I felt at UFV. It was more about thinking about the field than doing the field. And I really recognized that. There were a couple of people that I could find were much more personable, but there was this distance and this sense of privilege, I guess, is really where it came from. And I really always knew I was a student in those relationships. And so I learned a lot from that that's not the way I wanted to do it. And then eventually I came back and to the university. They graciously allowed me to do some sessional teaching. And then over the last little while, I've been able to find my feet because when I first started teaching, it was about, I think, a lot of power and control. I felt like I had to control the classroom. I had to control the relationships. I had to do a good job. I had to make sure I got to the curriculum, and I had to be a gatekeeper to keep all of those people that are not as passionate as me about the profession out of the profession. So consequently, I got in trouble because students rebelled and said, we ain't dealing with that kind of way of approaching things. And they, gave me a slap upside the head and asked for me to be real and authentic. And so that is what I've learned from students. And that has been the focus of my doctorate is how do I speak to, understand, and know myself as a CYC practitioner in the milieu of the post-secondary classroom, and what have students taught me in their learning journey about how to help them make their shift from seeing themselves just as students to seeing themselves as practitioners. And so that's what relational pedagogy is for me, is this journey through the woods where you get feedback and growth and development, and it's never ending. And each day is always an opportunity and an invitation for that change. So my question that I would have for the group is how in your relationship to those that share space with you that we might call students, the curriculum and the institutions in which we live, which have ideologies that sometimes disconnect us from one another, what one act of kindness and connection do you feel like you offer for those that you share space with?
It's a really good question, Mark. And without revealing details, I think that an example of what I'm about to say happened between us when you were a student and I was teaching, was vulnerability. You probably remember a connection around, yeah, you're naughty. So a particular vulnerability completely outside of what we were learning and the context of the relationship, but it was something we had in common. And I think a willingness on my part and your part to be vulnerable around that thing that was happening in our lives. And I think when Christy was sharing, something I wrote down was, are we providing social life? And as you were speaking, this idea that we spend so much time thinking about these things, but how are we doing them? And it's through that vulnerability. And there was a beautiful moment in the mindfulness class when Michaela was there with me. And she will maybe remember one of the students from another program after our silent retreat day, who was quite overcome. She was teary and was happy that she got through it, never imagined she could get through it, and just was in a really vulnerable moment. And I remember you, Michaela, standing up, giving her your number and saying, you're not alone, right? This person had experienced a lot of trauma previously and was just in a really vulnerable place. And your response to that vulnerability was to just show your vulnerability too, but also to just stand there with this person. So for me, it's vulnerability is how it would come to life.
Thank you, Christine. And I actually didn't recall that until you brought me into the invitation to recall it. And it was a powerful experience as well, of being connected at a time of feeling disconnected, which is what Christy offered us too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's these norms or mores of how we think we should be in certain contexts and situations. And it's risky, or it feels risky to reveal yourself sometimes. Like, how much do I reveal about me that might alter someone's perceptions, right? It feels like a bit of a dance sometimes around that. And often I've driven away from teaching going, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but oh well, it's out there in the world now. And getting okay with it. And even more than okay, probably saying, yeah, that was called for. That was the human part of me that showed up. So, okay, you're human.
Do
Yeah.
others have some thoughts or ideas around this idea of what do you sort of offer and bring into a space to create relational connection and openness?
That's a really good question. And honestly, when you asked it, I kind of felt lost. And with Christine's response, I absolutely love that. But I'm going to be fully transparent. I don't know concretely what I do and show up in those conversations necessarily. That's most naturally and consistent with myself. And I think that being more mindful about that next time or the next little while and just thinking about that definitely invites me to think about that. So yeah. Great question, though.
I think that for me, what it made me think of was a lot of people, even in my experience working at daycares and babysitting or nannying, a lot of people can see youth as delinquents or troubled children when they're acting out. And for me, I'm always drawn to those children. And I think that's like my biggest strength, I guess. I don't know if this really attests to the question that you were asking, but I think that that's kind of my biggest thing that I carry forward with me in CYC is being able to recognize when a youth or child is struggling and not seeing them as a delinquent or trouble or giving up on them or getting impatient, but rather going to them and saying, I'm still your friend at the end of the day. I'm not mad at you. You're not a bad person. What you did was a bad behavior, but it doesn't make you a bad person. So what can we do to help you? And I think, yeah, that is something that not many people have the patience with. So that's, yeah, mine.
Thanks, Michaela. I think it does answer that question well, because I think Christine also talked about how it resonated in the classroom. So what I see is this congruency that this is who you are, and you find opportunities to allow that to come in your relationships, which then must do what others need, which is that sense of connection, that sense of being valuable and important. And the offering of the telephone number is that I'm here not for the moment, but I'm here for you. And I think that invitation is a beautiful way to think about the way you relate to others. So on that note, I'm going to pick the ball and throw it over to Christine.
Thank you. So we've done all kinds of talking. So I am going to invite us into a practice for the moment. I also will share a screen again. So we become these little people on the side, and we're back at our territory acknowledgement, followed by this concept that was part of the proposal for this conference, a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who he has this concept of we inter-are. I am because of you. Ubuntu is a similar concept from some African nations. And I'm going to invite us to inter-be together for a moment through a unified breath practice. So if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, then just softening your gaze and finding a posture that's comfortable. Typically, we unfurl ourselves. So if legs are crossed, then inviting feet to be on the ground and inviting arms and hands just to be loose on our laps. And a dignified posture, not stoic or stiff, but just upright and open. And I invite you to put down what you are carrying. Become aware of your breath and breathing. In this moment, acknowledge your stopping and that you are with and in community. Imagine that we are breathing in unison together. And imagine you are feeling this breath as one movement. This one breath carries us when we cannot float ourselves. Maybe harbors us. This one breath connects us and reminds us that we are human together. Inhale and exhale in that certainty. So if your eyes have been closed, then just gently allowing them to come back open. Awareness of each other again here occupying the screen together. And before I say a few more things, would anyone like to comment on that particular practice? If not, they're good. We'll keep moving. I too really value Parker J. Palmer and this notion that we are a web of communal relationships, and that our reality is a web of communal relationships, and we can know reality only by being in community with it. And I think it kind of bundles and tangles and ties a lot of the concepts that each person has spoken to so far. And I didn't know where we would get to, but this does seem to kind of bundle it at this point. What I thought I would speak to is a concept that I've had for some time and have shared with Mark and some of the other faculty, is this idea of leading with integrity, that relational pedagogy for me is about a constellation of who I am. And I think, Christy, as you were sharing, and Michaela, the idea that who we were before we entered CYC doesn't get left behind. It gets transformed into who we are as a practitioner. That has held true for me. And so I've had the benefit of a long view now and many years of doing this teaching with intention, and kind of constructed my personal model, a meta-curricular model. And to go meta is to really kind of fold something back in on itself. So a meta-curriculum is a curriculum that pays attention or has awareness of the curriculum. And Mark and I have talked about the idea that teaching CYC is just part of a continuum of the practice of CYC. We don't stop being CYC when we teach CYC. We are CYC as we do it. And what grounds me in my practice are three big constellations. Definitely mindfulness, my mindful practice. And the core foundations of that are non-judging, patience. We've heard people speak to that already today. Beginner's mind, trust, this non-striving, that we don't need to have it all perfectly tidy and a certain set of outcomes, that we could let things emerge, being able to accept things as they happen and letting go. And I have great generosity and gratitude for the people I work and teach with and the students that I work and teach with, because they teach me. Appreciative inquiry and appreciative leadership also guide my practice, and I think about that. Using inquiry, and Christy, I think you're so skilled at the questions you ask and how you frame things. I think you're a naturally appreciative person who looks for strengths and has this curiosity. And then this sense of inclusion, inspiration, and integrity. And Michaela, I see you as being someone who just advocates so much for inclusion. The comments you made around, a child, you're not bad, the behavior. So I'm really separating that and seeing the humanity in everyone. It's really what inclusion is about. And then Parker Palmer's idea of this community of truth, which truly invites diversity and ambiguity and uncertainty. That a place, a safe harbor where people can be honest and conflicts can occur in creative ways. And that we have a deep sense of humility, but freedom to be ourselves. This illustration, the heart mind, was actually done by a teenage daughter of one of our other faculty. And she offered it to me as a gift, and I just love it and got her permission to use that. So I really think about bringing heart and mind together when I think about relational practice and pedagogy. So I want to offer the gift of a poem before I close out my time. And it's about interrelationships, and it's a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. You are me and I am you. Isn't it obvious that we inter-are? You cultivate the flower in yourself so that I will be beautiful. I transform the garbage in myself so that you will not have to suffer. I support you, you support me. I am in this world to offer you peace. You are in this world to bring me joy. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and come back to the people and see how that all landed.
I just want to say that was beautiful. I like those concepts.
Thank you, Christy.
The framework for articulating intentional care and practice, I really appreciate the amount of work that must have been to create simplicity. Simplicity is always the hardest thing to really represent. And the way in which that you offered an intentional process of relational being, and then invited us in to explore it and see it, was very powerful, and invites me to think about that for myself. How could I also take a moment and some time and some intention to look at that idea myself and represent it like that. I think it's a good anchor to have.
Thank you.
I think that the poem that you posted, the last two verses on it, I can't remember exactly what the one was. I give you something so that you can give me joy. That really, really stood out to me and resonated with me, because for me, like, I get the most joy from seeing the success in the children and seeing them flourish and seeing them grow and building those connections and knowing that I've made a change or made a difference and I've built that connection with that child. And so, like, giving them that safety net, giving them that guidance, teaching them their virtues and values, like those kinds of things, that all brings me joy. But not just that, that connection with the child, that child brings me joy. And I really resonated with that. And I really like that, because child and youth care work is so meaningful and you can get so much joy out of it and so many meaningful connections. And so that was a very beautiful poem.
Thank you. Thank you. There's like I said, I've had the benefit of a long number of years, just a few other things I had thought about and jotted down. When we lead with integrity, others know they can depend on us to connect them to the whole. And your example sets a standard for others to follow. So teaching with integrity, engagement, focus, and presence is what I mentioned at the start, I believe, relationally responsible. And as I hear examples, like, Michaela, you're still in our program and learning, but you're doing this already. You're teaching. And so this distinguish, Mark and I were making this session available to really examine what is teaching, learning, who's an educator, what's the curriculum, who's the learner. We all are, we are all those things, and it just shifts from moment to moment. And to me, that's good teaching, right? When we're truly present, we're deeply engaged, and we can weave this complex web of connections. We can move in and out of different roles and really learn from each other. So it's my belief that's what's needed is us to all kind of systematically reflect and inquire all the time about our challenges, about our good stuff, about our challenging stuff, and bring those habits, skills, and values to our work with each other. It requires this kind of going meta. Always be willing to fold it back and look on it with awareness. Yeah, I have gratitude for each of you today and sharing this space with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
You know, Christine, one of the things that also resonates as you kind of bring us to a close here is you talked about that sometimes even now you're driving home from an experience where we have this idea of teaching and students and learning and that kind of stuff. And you're driving home, you're going like, oh, did I share too much of myself? And I think the idea of risk in relationship should always be present, that we're always in that questioning and that integrity. That integrity means that sometimes we do feel discomfort, because I think that is really where we're hitting the coalface of a relationship. Those moments of vulnerability for both parties.
Mhm.
So I think we have to stop recording before we are pulled back into the larger space.
Yes, I will stop the recording.